Hey, good morning, good late morning, everybody. I'm going to talk about the vision, the compelling vision for smart manufacturing from the voice of the industry. And basically, this is a body of work that's in process using the Executive Council. So, like all slides that you've seen, it's been mandatory for us to put John Dyke's picture on every slide, regardless if he's going to attend or not. So myself and Bart will be doing this section. So the context of what we're going to talk about in the next 15 minutes or so is really around positioning our smart manufacturing playbook that is in process of being authored by the Smart Manufacturing Executive Council. And you heard about this earlier, but really the spirit of this thing is that how can we, as an executive council, as 30 plus national leaders in organizations, put together the what must be true story for smart manufacturing to actually be adopted, to be executed, and to be accelerated across the nation. And so what's been done is we met yesterday, and we've been refining kind of the high points of not only a vision statement about what must be true and what attributes must happen, as well as the what must be true on these different personas that John talked about earlier. And so let's kind of start this discussion. When you look at the landscape that we're all working in, none of this should be new news to anybody. But these kind of, this list of things that are up here, and I'll talk briefly about each one, are really kind of the grand challenges, or some would say problems of the day. So you think about what's going on with the workforce. We heard earlier from NIST and MEP, what was it, 4 million jobs gap that we have. We have scarcity of just the actual resource itself, but the skills that the resources represent. We've now seen this changing customer behavior and expectations around, when you talk to a plant manager, what does every plant manager want? Make one thing and make a lot of it. How does that match with consumer expectations? Does everyone want a black car or Cheerios with no Honey Nut Cheerios or no flavoring? So this topic of changing behavior and what customers expect, this kind of one-to-one customization is really changing manufacturing. And then in previous presentations, John's presented a number of U.S. slides, federal government slides, that show the declining or flattening of productivity. And so when we think about smart manufacturing, we think about the hope for this next generation productivity and kind of how we break through. So we'll briefly talk about that. We've all experienced climate disruptions and the unsteadiness of our own environment and how it can knock out manufacturing at a heartbeat when the storm comes through or something happens. The technology advances, we're hearing about that when we're here at the conference. We don't expect any slowdown or change in pace on technology advances. And so, the very first system that you put in is as soon as you put it in, do you have technical debt and is it obsolete? Or do you have a platform that can grow? So that's obviously a driver to try to understand this playbook. And then geopolitical pressures, who knows where pressures between countries are going to break out, tariffs are going to happen, this unsteadiness of what's going on in a global economy, that's just a fact of life. We've all experienced supply chain challenges with pandemics, and oddly enough, I would suggest that many of us still haven't changed enough to learn from the pandemic to not keep repeating the same scenarios that we've gone through before. And lastly, and that was talked about with this partnership between SMEC and Simani, the whole issue of cybersecurity. And it doesn't get any easier, right? So this set of grand challenges that we face, you'd go, well, what am I going to do with that? is this Debbie Downer time and I'm just whining about the ecosystem that we've got headwinds against? Or how can we turn headwinds into tailwinds and actually move this along? So Bart?
Thank you, Jim. Do you hear me well? So, as you heard from Jim, and I think it should be no surprise, right? Manufacturing is clearly challenged, and supply chains as a whole are challenged by this trend and drivers that Jim has been talking about. And I think a lot of you experience one or more of these things every day. So it's clearly a new world. It's a more dynamic and complex world within us, which demand action. And so for us, manufacturing and supply chain, it is very critical we adapt our mindsets, our operating models to meet these new realities and to continue to fulfill the expectations that the stakeholders have from us. And by the way, these expectations are also continuously rising. So continuous rising expectations and operating in an environment that is more complex and more challenging to deliver on that. Now, we're going to talk about that in more detail later. First, what I want to highlight to you is a very exciting opportunity for manufacturing and supply chains. I think there's no better time than today than now to be in manufacturing and supply chains. And the why is on the slide. Manufacturing has historically been, I would say, dealt with as a cost center, right? We've been viewed as a cost center. We were taken for granted. We were there to manufacture and ship products to customers. The pandemic clearly renewed its importance and its reputation. And now we can build on that momentum. We can leverage that momentum with smart manufacturing. Smart manufacturing, Industry 4.0, it's all the same thing, can enable us to go beyond the traditional cost improvements and productivity improvements, and can enable us as manufacturing and supply chain to drive very differentiating business and customer outcomes. Examples I'm referring to, for example, accelerated launch of new products and time to market. We can directly drive profitability and cash flow improvements with technology. We can significantly increase agility, flexibility, resilience, and sustainability. We can be at the forefront of personalized solutions and products. So in doing so, manufacturing and supply chains can really become equal business partners at the table with commercial and R&D. You could say even more, we can become a competitive advantage for the business. And I would say this is an inflection point for manufacturing, and it is very similar to what IT has gone through 10, 15 years ago, right? They went through a similar transformation. So this is our big transformation, this is our moment, and it's a huge opportunity. Let me illustrate what I'm talking about with a specific example. Orthopedics, right? In the orthopedic business, the surgeons typically select a number of sets of implants, a knee, a hip, a shoulder, and the related instruments the surgeon will need to perform the surgery. Why is that a number of sets? Because they have an idea what the patient needs, but they take a smaller and a larger set to be sure they have all what they need to execute the surgery successfully. You can imagine this results in a very complicated supply chain, a lot of inventory, and you can imagine also the material handling in hospitals is very challenging. With 3D printing, we can create a personalized implant for that individual patient, fit for them, based on their individual CT scan. The vision, the ambition is, we are not there yet. There are examples, but not really fully deployed, is that we do that printing at the point of consumption, at the point of use, so in the hospital. So we can imagine this greatly simplifies the supply chain for the manufacturer, greatly simplifies the logistics for the hospitals, but even more important, it also brings a lot of benefits to the patient. A much better experience before, during, and after the surgery, much more effective surgeries, outcomes, and by the way, there is really a huge chance on avoiding and reducing the need, the potential need for repeat surgeries, which happen quite often today. So this shift from a cost center to a business partner to a competitive advantage is huge. It's not an evolution. I talked about the inflection point. We call it a transformation, and we call it a reinvention of manufacturing. Now, supply chain and manufacturing leaders must take ownership for this transition. And I would say even more, it's an obligation that we have to make this happen, because the US economy and a lot of people depend on it. Let's now talk about what that reinvention means from a mindset and operating model perspective. And Jim will talk about the mindset component of that.
Yeah, so let's put some meat on the bones and look at what this future state really looks like when we think about reinvention. Because the word reinvention, that word's overused, right? And people can't put meat on that bones to understand what it is. So what we're really trying to do is to say, okay, let's start with, we have 4 different categories that we're going to talk about: mindset, operating model, people, and technology. So let's start with mindset. Today, if you follow that slide around manufacturing being seen as a cost center, you kind of feel this today, and hopefully you can nod your heads around this and go, yeah, that's me. I can see myself in that equation. You have a victim mindset, right? Because where does the rubber hit the road? The rubber hits the road at the factory. So any of the mistakes on planning, scheduling, resourcing, materials, labor, all of that stuff has to be dealt with and managed in chaos by the factory to pull the rabbit out of the hat to actually deliver on-time quality product. So they kind of have this, you know, I'm always the victim in here. And so when you see the victim, you see hero mentality as well. Pulling the rabbit out of the hat, I'm a hero. This shift that we just got done talking about, what's the shift going on here? The shift is to move to this driver of capability, the driver of business outcomes, and an enabler of a different future. So instead of being a victim, I'm actually proactive and creating opportunities. You see an operational focus today. In the future, people have used different words for this, but this customer obsession, this concept of you're not making one thing for everybody, you're making one thing for a body. The eaches concept versus the multiple concepts, and being highly reactive to that, Exactly opposite of what manufacturers want to hear, but we have to figure out how to make that true. Mm-hmm. Reacting and responding, that's the victim mentality and playing hero every day. Moving to proactive and anticipatory, so having an eye on the prize, having an eye on supply and demand, as an example. And then the last one, safety, cost, and quality is table stakes for manufacturing. Add on to that, we also have to be resilient and agile. We're not giving up on safety, cost, and quality, but we added more to the table. So when Lisa talked about her journey and about the complexity, you can see this complexity. But this really represents the shift that we need to make to go from cost center to enabler. Okay.
Okay. So the next one is operating model and people. So operating model, we all experience that new business and operating models are emerging, and they turn supply chains into interconnected networks versus linear supply chains based on physical flow. Now, in a lot of cases, these new models are driven by technology innovation. If I go back to the 3D printing example in orthopedics I gave you, you can imagine that this leads to a completely different way of working between the manufacturer, the hospitals, the surgeons, the providers, etc. So these interconnected networks are actually holistic collaborative ecosystems, including manufacturers, suppliers, tech providers, machine builders, customers, and other stakeholders. Now, with that change, manufacturing and supply chain leaders need to act as, I call it, end-to-end orchestrators, focusing on holistic collaboration, on trust building across that network, that ecosystem. And when we talk about the network ecosystem, and doing that versus merely managing their own operations and functions. Now, for that ecosystem, there is that broad external ecosystem, but we should never forget the internal collaboration between functions remains very important, and that should also be more directly driven by manufacturing and supply chain leaders versus leaving every function on its own to talk to each other. What I think you also realize and see happening is with the emergence of these new models, in a lot of cases, that implies organizational design changes. So a lot of that results in different organizational models as well. Then if we kind of on the bridge, the last one there is the bridge to the people part, a shift from a primarily product and process focus, how we have been living in manufacturing for the last decades, to a more employee-centric approach is very critical to make these technology transformations, smart manufacturing, successful. So going digital alone in itself is not enough, right? It's all about people, we know it. People make the difference. So we need to amplify more that focus on people, on our workforce. So this means that for smart manufacturing technology innovation, the focus is to enhance the workforce experience and how we can meet their needs. And this has a couple of requirements. I think the first one, which we should never forget, is the basics, right? The workforce will always want to feel rewarded, valued, and impactful. We should never forget that. We should never get our eyes off that ball. But yes, expectations are changing. The younger generations, I would say, prioritize things like purpose-driven work environments, sustainability, work-life balance, health and wellness. They want to be empowered. So they don't have the mindset anymore like in the past of it's just a job, right, that we do. They had a bigger aspiration with their work. And we need to adapt to that. Also, we really need to invest more in the growth of our people and the upskilling to boost engagement, but also, as Jim referred to these skill gaps in the beginning, to close those skill gaps, because we have huge skill gaps and they can only get larger with technology evolving. In that regard, we can leverage technology and use technology to really accelerate the time to competency, and hopefully we get that to close to zero for at least basic competencies. Also, in this technology era, training and education are not, let's say, time points. They are a continuum. Learning is a continuous journey, and that's why we talk about learning journeys. And by the way, the learning journeys need to be individualized for every worker, because they're different. And lastly, we really have to use technology to simplify the life of our workforce and make it more interesting. And here there's a lot of things we can do, right? I'll give a couple of examples. The first one is we need to make the access to data and information and knowledge easier for the workforce so they can get to answers faster, so that we can get to better informed decision making. And here, you know, we have the ChatGPTs, the Gen AIs, etc., right? The second one, which is also very important, is this blurring human-machine interfaces. That makes, nowadays with technology, the interaction and the collaboration between humans and machines much more seamless. And here we know examples, smart workstations, there is cobots, collaborative robots, we have more intuitive user interface and HMIs, AR, VR for remote maintenance, etc. The next one is automation of repetitive tasks. To really free up the workforce for more complex work, for more interesting work, and also give them the room to be more focused on outcomes, expand their responsibilities versus being individual task-oriented. And lastly, another important lever we can pull is building digital augmented and connected workforce to improve efficiencies, to improve communication, engagement, agility of the workforce. And here we have the myriad of solutions, right? Augmented reality, digital communication platforms, data science and analytics, etc.
Okay.
And I'll hand it back to Jim.
And the last element of this shift for reinvention is around technology. And I think in the last segment with Jonathan and John, you guys did a fabulous job on that. this functional solutions, disconnected systems, data models per solution is what you talked about in silos. And I didn't know how polite this audience was when you said, do we want to do that? I was ready to stand up and say, no, hell no, we don't want to do that, right? We need to get to this thing that Jonathan talked about, open and interoperable systems, common and standard data platforms, and of course, all being secure. Is that easy? No, I mean, there's a long journey. Everyone's been on it for multiple years. But well said by Jonathan, we have to get there. This shift that we're making, this shift that is next generation capabilities and manufacturing competitiveness, it's not a question of do we want to do that? We have to do this. And this is about bringing all of us in, and that's why I'm so happy to be sitting here talking about this shift and talking about these themes that must be true. And the very next step is who's got our back is Executive Council with 32 plus major world-class companies that are also standing up and saying, this is what we believe in. We believe that these problems, these themes have to shift and answer these questions. And that's what's coming up next. So hang on for this whole session of what must be true in detail beyond this.
That's right. Thank you. Every time I see this presentation,